Caleb hauled me away from the chaos at a breakneck speed. By the time we were sealed inside the low-slung chassis of his sports car, the wedding guests were still a collective blur of confusion. In the conventional narrative, a man crashing a wedding is there for the bride. But Caleb was never conventional. He was the friend I had spent my life trying to please, ever since I could form words. It was only natural that he would go to war for me today, without a moment's hesitation. I watched the sharp, refined line of his jaw as the Porsche's engine screamed to life, a thunderous sound that carried us all the way to his secluded house perched on the coastal cliffs. The moment the engine died, the silence was filled with the crisp, salt-laced air of freedom. I finally understood how liberating it felt to shed a role I never wanted. I unclipped my seatbelt, my exhilaration bubbling over as I slapped his shoulder. I told him he was a lifesaver. My mind was already racing, planning how I would make a fortune to repay this monumental debt. A low chuckle vibrated through the car's interior. He turned, his gaze pinning me to the leather seat. He asked me how exactly I intended to repay him. The tone was playful, yet a primal instinct shrieked danger inside my skull. I immediately dismissed the thought. This was Caleb, my constant for 23 years. He wouldn't harm me. Yet, when I looked up, I fell into the burning intensity of his stare, a look so predatory it felt like he wanted to devour me whole. I instinctively recoiled, but the car door blocked any escape. A worse discovery followed. My elbow had inadvertently pressed a button on the console. The passenger seat began to recline, a slow, motorized descent. As Caleb's form loomed closer, I had no choice but to follow the seat's trajectory until I was lying flat. In that instant of total vulnerability, his torso was a perfect shadow cast over me. My intuition screamed that something was about to happen. I didn't dare ask, couldn't dare to think. I squeezed my eyes shut. The next thing I knew, the seat sprang back to its upright position. Caleb's voice, laced with a rare, teasing quality, broke the tension. He wondered if I was feigning sleep to avoid settling my tab, calling me his little sleeping prince. The final word was drawn out, a silken thread of sound that tickled my ear and sent a strange heat spreading from the point of contact. It felt like the persistent, light stroke of a feather. My indignation flared, and my eyes snapped open. I retorted that I was good for it, challenging him to name his price. I was curious to see just how audacious his demand would be. His smile deepened. He leaned in again, and the air grew thick, my own breathing becoming a frantic rhythm in my ears. Then he reached out. His fingers brushed against my neck as he plucked a stray piece of confetti from my shirt collar. I was baffled. We both ran at a normal human temperature, yet the fleeting touch through the fabric of my shirt had felt searing hot. He saw the dumbfounded look on my face and shook his head gently. He told me that what he wanted was something I couldn't give him right now. Couldn't give him? The only thing I couldn't provide at this moment was a massive wire transfer. But I wasn't one to skip out on a debt. My brow furrowed with earnestness. I confessed that my current savings weren't substantial, but offered to give him $5 million upfront and write an IOU for the rest. The smile on Caleb's face froze. He looked as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I worried that he thought I would default on our arrangement. I nervously wet my lips and swore that I would work incredibly hard to earn the money. This seemed to only agitate him further. His jaw tightened, and he practically ground out the words, telling me he didn't need money. Just as I was about to ask what else he could possibly need, my phone rang, shattering the charged atmosphere. I answered it, and my father's incandescent rage blasted through the speaker, nearly perforating my eardrum. He demanded to know if I had any idea what a mess I had made, what a financial catastrophe my escape had caused for the family. He ordered me to return immediately, to smooth things over with Jessica Vance, and to see the wedding through. It was an age-old truth that money moved the hearts of men. Otherwise, my father would never have bothered to call the son. He'd always considered little more than a byproduct of a loveless corporate alliance. But the day I decided to run, I was prepared to burn every bridge. I scoffed, informing him that I wasn't coming back and he should give up hope. I suggested, with dripping sarcasm, that if he was truly desperate, he could always try groveling before the Vances. Abject humiliation was, after all, his area of expertise. My insolence pushed him over the edge. His voice became a roar, questioning what was so wrong with asking for a small sacrifice after he had provided for me my entire life. He called me an ungrateful, worthless brat. I was about to fire back with a retort of my own when Caleb's hand closed around my wrist. His expression was terrifyingly cold. He informed my father that Leo would not be returning. He then stated that if a merger was what he wanted, he himself was a far superior candidate. With that, he ended the call. I failed to grasp Caleb's logic. I asked him to explain what that was all about. He clarified that even without Jessica Vance, my father would just find another heiress, a Sarah or an Emily. He knew I wouldn't agree to any of them, and my father would resort to any means necessary to force my hand. Caleb's gaze deepened as he laid out his alternative. By contrast, if I were with him, it would not only silence my father's demands but also give me the freedom and space to build my own life. When the time was right, I could finally break free from his control. And Caleb, as my best friend, would never stand in my way. It made perfect sense. A strategic alliance with Caleb had immense benefits. He was truly the best friend I could have asked for, willing to sacrifice his own reputation and time to such a degree for my sake. My heart swelled with a profound, genuine gratitude. I nodded enthusiastically, telling him how brilliant he was. Caleb sighed unexpectedly. He said that before they could proceed with their merger, there was one significant problem. Jessica Vance would not let this public humiliation go unanswered. As if on cue, he held up his phone. The screen displayed the top trending topic online. The headline was sensational. Sterling heir abandons fiancée at altar. Devastated bride finds solace with groom's younger half-brother. The half-brother in question was, as I suspected, my father's other son. Jessica's damage control was remarkably swift and ruthless. The speed at which she had flipped the narrative and painted me as the villain was impressive. My face hardened. I told Caleb I would sneak back into the estate and retrieve the security footage, boasting about my first-rate skills at climbing the trellis up to my old bedroom window. It was a skill honed during my high school years, when I'd frequently used that route to escape to the Thorn estate for refuge. Caleb pressed his fingers to his forehead, a gesture of fond exasperation. He assured me it was unnecessary. He already had the surveillance feeds. I clapped my hands together like an excited seal. I told him he was amazing. He let out another long-suffering sigh, set his phone down, and cupped my face in both his hands. He began to gently knead my cheeks. He asked, his voice tender, if I could ever learn to think one step ahead. My words came out muffled and distorted. I mumbled that coming up with the escape plan was pretty brilliant on my part. Besides, I added, he was with me. I told him with utter seriousness that he was my best friend and would always be on my side. It was a truth I had held onto since childhood. His presence had always been a source of profound security, for reasons I never fully understood. My brazen confidence made him laugh. He released me, calling me a little rascal who never considered the consequences. He then dialed his assistant. After a brief, efficient conversation, the truth was out. The real security footage went viral, and Jessica Vance became the subject of public scorn. My father's frantic calls began to flood my phone. I declined them without a second thought, then powered the device off completely for good measure. I tucked the phone into my pocket and got out of the car with Caleb. As we walked towards the glass and steel entrance of his house, he suddenly grabbed my hand. I reflexively splayed my fingers, lacing them with his. It was a familiar little ritual we had, something he initiated whenever he was out of sorts. But something felt different. Why was he suddenly upset? I turned to look at him. The half-smile, half-scowl on his face told me everything. What had happened in the less than 100-foot walk from the car to the door to change his mood? Men were so fickle. But this was Caleb. He had to be placated. I asked him what was wrong, why he seemed unhappy. He said nothing, simply leading me to a sprawling white sofa and sitting me down. He claimed there was something missing, something I hadn't noticed. I truly had no idea. I leaned closer, cautiously asking what it was. He watched me, one eyebrow arched. He reminded me that I had agreed to his proposal of a strategic alliance, but I had forgotten that such an arrangement required a public announcement. He recalled, with pointed accuracy, that my engagement to Jessica had been accompanied by a professional photo shoot. He then asked where his was. His tone was laced with a strange, manufactured sense of grievance that made my chest ache. I couldn't let Caleb feel slighted. The thought dominated my mind. Before I could process it, I had slammed my hand on the coffee table and declared that we would do something explosive, something that would completely overshadow anything I had done with Jessica. I now suspect I was having a momentary lapse in sanity. Why this particular issue sparked such a competitive streak in me was a mystery. And why had I uttered something so foolish? But Caleb was delighted. His smile was like the first thaw of spring. I pouted slightly, telling myself that a competitive spirit was a positive trait. It meant we were both ambitious. Yes, that had to be it. The inexplicable flutter in my heart was just a trick of my imagination. The next second, Caleb pushed me down onto the sofa. His warm breath ghosted across my skin, so close that the slightest turn of my head would result in our lips meeting. I couldn't tear my eyes away from his mouth. For the first time, I noticed how pale the color was, how smooth the skin looked, entirely free of any imperfection. It looked incredibly soft. My mind went blank, a swirl of white noise, until the sharp click of a camera shutter snapped me back to reality. Caleb pulled away completely. He dangled his phone in front of my face. I refocused my eyes. On the screen was a perfectly staged photo of us in a near kiss, a trick of perspective. He announced that once the current scandal died down, this would be our official announcement. I didn't know how to react. A part of my brain, the logical part, screamed that this was an unnecessarily dramatic gesture for a fake relationship between friends. I should have refused. But before I could form the words, Caleb's phone rang. A stern, female voice came through the speaker, berating him. His mother wanted to know why he had sabotaged my wedding, informing him that Mr. Sterling had already called to complain. She demanded to know if he understood the implications of this new, proposed alliance for the Thorn Corporation. She ordered him to come home immediately and explain himself. The sharp reprimand came from the woman Caleb respected more than anyone. I felt a cold dread seep into me. I had managed to completely derail Caleb's life. The frantic pounding of my heart slowed to a heavy, anxious thud. I followed him into the Thorn family's main residence feeling like a condemned man. Mr. and Mrs. Thorn were seated on a damask sofa in the formal living room, sipping tea. Their expressions were placid, but the air was thick with tension. I grew increasingly nervous. Caleb, without a hint of hesitation, took my hand and led me towards them. Ultimately, this was a mess of my own making. I couldn't let Caleb take the fall for me. I squeezed his hand tightly, stepped forward, and addressed his parents. I told them it was all my fault. I hadn't wanted the marriage and had begged Caleb to help me. I pleaded with them not to blame him. Mr. Thorn merely spared Caleb a brief, cool glance and instructed him to follow him to his study. What was happening? Was he going to punish him behind closed doors? Panic seized me. I started to say that I would go too, but Caleb tugged my arm, cutting me off. He gave me a reassuring look. He told me it was fine and to wait for him. I watched him walk away, his back straight and unyielding, and my heart sank. A gentle voice came from behind me. Mrs. Thorn told me not to worry, that they were just having a chat. She invited me to sit down. I obediently sat across from her, ready to launch into my explanation again, but she spoke first. She asked me if Caleb had been deceiving me. Deceiving me? What did I have that was worth deceiving? Money, perhaps? But I already owed him that. After a moment of thought, I shook my head firmly. I insisted that Caleb had not lied to me. On the contrary, I was the one who was constantly causing him trouble. To my surprise, Mrs. Thorn sighed and pressed her fingers to her temple, a faint "Kushal" on her lips. She advised me in a very serious tone not to believe and act on every single thing he said. I nodded without thinking. That was easy enough. I wasn't some mindless fool with no opinions of my own. Seeing my agreement, she seemed to relax. She stood up, saying I should get some rest after such an ordeal. She was going to check on the two of them in the study. I watched her leave as instructed. I waved off the housekeeper who offered to show me to a guest room and, moving with the familiarity of long practice, let myself into Caleb's bedroom to wait. 2 hours crawled by. He still hadn't returned. I was so tired my eyelids felt like lead weights. When I awoke, Caleb was kneeling beside me. His cheek was swollen and red. He'd been hit. The last vestiges of sleep evaporated, and my awareness sharpened to a fine point. I sat bolt upright, my voice raspy as I said his name. I apologized, telling him it was my fault he'd been hurt. I immediately started rummaging through his nightstand drawer for the first aid kit. When I turned back, I saw his head was bowed, his entire posture radiating a heartbreaking mix of sorrow and pain. A sour ache spread through my chest. I should have gone with him to the study. Then I would have been the one to take the blow. But there were no do-overs. The best I could do was hurry to his side and gently cup his face. I told him we needed to put some cream on it. The cool, white ointment was soon spread across the bruise, but just as I was about to put the tube away, he caught my wrist. His voice was low and pitiful, laced with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite decipher, something hypnotic. He whispered that his face was burning. I leaned in cautiously and blew gently on his cheek a few times. I asked if that helped at all. He shook his head. My anxiety spiked, but then he murmured that he'd heard a kiss makes the pain go away. He asked if I could possibly kiss it for him. But that was something couples did, wasn't it? Then again, that wasn't entirely true. In other cultures, people kiss cheeks as a greeting. Close friends, sisters, they kissed each other. And my relationship with Caleb was that close. He would never lie to me or try to hurt me. So, a kiss should be a perfectly natural thing to do. Having rationalized it, I looked at him seriously and told him to lower his head. He complied, his eyes fluttering shut as he tilted his head down. As the distance between us closed, my heartbeat went wild, a frantic, syncopated rhythm against my ribs. My head felt light. I closed my eyes and leaned in to press my lips to his cheek. The sensation was soft and delicate, but with an unexpected moisture. I opened my eyes in confusion, only to find that I had somehow kissed the corner of his mouth. Good news. My previous assessment that his lips looked very kissable was accurate. Bad news. I think I had just stolen his first kiss, but I had aimed so carefully. The spot I was going for was nowhere near his lips. Could he have moved his head on purpose? I looked at him with suspicion, but was met with nothing but wide-eyed innocence. He asked me, his voice a picture of confusion, why I had just kissed him on the mouth. I didn't have an answer. My mind was a complete blank. I frantically tried to piece together what had just happened, but came up with nothing. I was about to question him further when a phone chimed, breaking the spell. It wasn't mine. It was Caleb's. He glanced at the screen, then answered the call and walked into the adjoining bathroom, closing the door behind him. I wasn't allowed to listen. Why? The chaotic thrumming in my chest subsided, replaced by a slow, creeping bitterness. When he reemerged, he was ready to leave. He told me to stay and rest there for the night. He had an urgent matter to attend to and had to go out, but instructed me not to leave the Thorn property. I nodded silently, watching him leave for the second time that day. I tossed and turned before finally falling into a restless sleep filled with disjointed dreams. When I woke, there was no sign of Caleb. I stared at our message history, a blank slate. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, typing and deleting messages before I gave up and exited the app. I dialed his number. The call went straight to voicemail, a clear signal that he had declined it. I stared at the phone, stunned. A moment later it rang, and my hopes surged. But it wasn't Caleb. It was my friend, Ryan. His cheerful voice greeted me, teasing me for finally being reachable. He said the internet was exploding and that he was coming to pick me up. He wanted a front row seat to the drama. I quietly agreed. Being with Ryan seemed safe. After I hung up, I sent him my location, which earned a text in response. As if you needed to send that. Everyone in our circle knows that if you're looking for Leo Sterling, you go to Caleb Thorne's place. Ryan was a man of action. Before long, he had spirited me away to his own small, modern house. He handed me an iced latte and wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. He pressed me for details, wanting to know if Caleb and I were finally together. I was confused by his question. I refuted it immediately, explaining that it was impossible. Caleb was just helping me out. It was a temporary measure. To prevent any further misunderstanding from our future plans, I told him about the fake engagement and the announcement photo. Ryan stared at me, his expression shifting to one of profound pity. He offered, half-jokingly, to buy me some of those Focus gummies, saying he couldn't believe I had misinterpreted the situation so completely. I protested, insisting that it was Caleb's idea in the first place. This only seemed to agitate Ryan more. He exclaimed that it couldn't be, that his ship couldn't be fake. He insisted that Caleb had been in love with me for years. Caleb in love with me? A strange, exhilarating joy bloomed in my chest, only to be instantly crushed by a memory I kept buried. I avoided Ryan's gaze. I told him he didn't understand. Caleb was in love with someone else, not me. I had seen a love letter he wrote once. As the words left my mouth, Ryan's expression crumpled. He looked like he was about to burst into tears. I wanted to comfort him, but I couldn't speak. I was afraid my voice would tremble and betray me. A heavy, sorrowful silence descended upon the room, but it was abruptly shattered. Ryan suddenly sat up, shoving his phone in my face. He told me something big had happened. They were together. I looked closely. The photo was grainy and dark, clearly taken in a dimly lit bar, but the figures were unmistakable. Jessica Vance had her hands on Caleb's collar, pulling him down towards her. The pose was intimate, suggestive of a kiss. My heart skipped a beat, and the air caught in my throat. Was this the urgent matter Caleb had to attend to? A meeting with Jessica? I couldn't bring myself to ask the question out loud. Ryan, however, exploded. He yanked me off the sofa, his voice a roar as he headed for the door. He called Caleb a cheater and declared that we were going to go bust them. Ryan drove like a man possessed, and soon we were standing outside the door of the private room number their social circle informant had provided. The door was slightly ajar. Ryan and I positioned ourselves so we could see everything inside without being seen. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing myself for the worst. The scene inside was not what I expected. Caleb was lounging in the center of a large booth, his shirt slightly unbuttoned, his posture radiating an intimidating aura of command. In front of him, a bodyguard in a black suit had Jessica's head pinned firmly to the surface of the table, holding her immobile. The entire tableau looked like a crime boss dealing with a traitor. The raw, predatory energy coming off Caleb was so intense that I questioned if this was the same person I knew. My Caleb had always been gentle, patient. I heard Ryan swallow hard beside me. He stammered that perhaps we had come to the wrong place on the wrong night. He tried to pull me away, but at that exact moment, Caleb's head snapped up. His eyes locked directly onto ours. A wave of guilt washed over me, though I had no idea what I had to be guilty about. I scowled, trying to glare back at him with equal intensity. A small smile played on Caleb's lips. He straightened his collar, stood up, and pressed the bodyguard's hand down harder on Jessica's head. His voice was dangerously soft. He warned Jessica that if she ever bothered me again, he wouldn't hesitate to help her older sister clean house. Jessica was the illegitimate daughter of the Vance patriarch. The true heir was the daughter born to his wife. Jessica was also the person who had made my life a living hell for a year after Caleb went to study abroad, the same person my father wanted me to marry and worship. Jessica remained silent. Caleb dismissed her without another glance and strode towards me. When he reached me, he methodically unwound Ryan's fingers from my own and replaced them with his. His lips curved into a gentle smile. He asked me what I was doing there. I don't know what came over me, but Ryan's words from earlier just tumbled out of my mouth. I told him I was there to catch him cheating. The moment the words were out, my face flushed with heat. Caleb's smile didn't falter. His eyes, however, seemed to have tiny hooks in them, pulling me in. He purred that there was no infidelity for me to find. He claimed to be a completely devoted man and that I had misunderstood. He then asked how I was going to compensate him for the misunderstanding. How had he turned this around so that I was suddenly indebted to him again? Still holding his hand, I gave it a sharp squeeze. I retorted that he was the one who made me misunderstand in the first place, so he should be compensating me. I felt a small thrill of victory at turning his own logic against him. Caleb was about to reply when Ryan cleared his throat loudly. He muttered something about feeling like a third wheel. The intimidating aura around Caleb vanished instantly. He said the evening was over and it was time to go home. He added as an afterthought that someone should also see Ms. Vance home. I pushed down the questions bubbling up inside me and let him lead me out of the bar. As we left, I heard Jessica's voice, a raw, desperate shriek from behind us. She screamed at me, asking if I had any idea what Caleb had done behind my back. She called me a clueless fool and shrieked that making me kneel and lick her shoes back then had been too lenient a punishment. My blood ran cold. My face went pale. I couldn't bring myself to look at Caleb. He turned his head slightly and gave an order to one of his men. He told him to shut her up and deliver her to her older sister. Now it was Jessica's turn to be terrified. But I didn't care. Logic and emotion were both screaming at me to run. The next thing I knew, Caleb had swept me up into his arms. He murmured that we were going home. After we parted ways with Ryan, Caleb took me to his penthouse, the place he actually lived in. I curled up in the corner of a vast, minimalist sofa, taking a long time to compose myself. I forced a smile that felt brittle and tight. I asked him if the call he had received the day before was from Jessica. He handed me a glass of water and nodded. So he knew. He knew everything. He had seen the disgusting photos she had taken. My voice was a hoarse whisper when I asked if he had seen them. He didn't answer with words. He sat beside me and firmly but gently turned my body to face him. His long arms wrapped around my back, pulling me against him. I buried my face in his shoulder and wept silently. He stroked my back, his hand moving in a steady, calming rhythm from my neck to the small of my back. He whispered that it would never happen again, that I should not be afraid. He promised he would never leave me alone again. The grief was slowly replaced by the frantic drumming of my heart and a secret, budding joy. My tears finally stopped when my eyes were swollen shut. Caleb ruffled my hair, then disappeared into the bathroom to get a warm towel for me. Feeling awkward, I picked up my phone to distract myself and saw I had several new messages. They were from Jessica. One read, "What do you think Caleb will do when he finds out you intercepted the love letter he wrote for me?" Another followed immediately. "I already told him." The love letter. Caleb had written it right before he left for college overseas. He had given it to me, telling me it was for the only one in his heart. The hero of the story loves the heroine. As the hero's best friend, I was supposed to deliver that letter to Jessica. But a sudden, violent thunderstorm had soaked me to the bone, and the letter was destroyed. That was why Jessica had bullied me. And now Caleb knew. What would he do to me? I couldn't bear to think about it. I was like an ant on a hot pan, frantic and lost. I had just managed to get my shoes on when Caleb's voice, sharp with anger, came from behind me. He demanded to know where I thought I was going. A shiver went down my spine. I bit my lip, too afraid to answer. The next second, he hoisted me over his shoulder with a cold laugh. The sudden vertigo and fear made me cling to him tightly. I begged him to put me down. He acted as if he couldn't hear me. The dizzying trip ended when I was tossed onto the center of his massive bed. I scrambled to get up, but he was on me in an instant, flipping me onto my stomach. His knee pinned my legs, immobilizing me, and his hands were even more unforgiving. He grasped both of my wrists in one large hand. His hot breath stirred the hair near my ear. He whispered that I knew everything now, and I shouldn't even think about running. I was genuinely terrified. I apologized, sobbing that I didn't do it on purpose. I struggled against his hold, but it only resulted in a dull, metallic click. A cold, heavy sensation clamped around my ankle, and I trembled. I twisted my head to look down. A chain, emerging from a mechanism in the bed frame, was now locked around my ankle. It was attached to the bed. He had locked me up. He was insane. My breathing became ragged. Was he going to punish me for the letter just like Jessica had? Did our years of friendship mean nothing compared to the supposed destiny between a hero and heroine? Why did he help me before, Was it all a game to give me hope just to rip it away? I started to fight him in earnest, thrashing wildly. But the difference in our sizes was too great. I was no match for him. Finally, exhausted and defeated, I screamed at him. I demanded to know if this was because I failed to deliver his letter to Jessica, because I made them miss their chance. I sobbed that I knew I was wrong, that I could apologize and make it up to him, and I begged him not to do this to me. I was pleading with him, but he remained silent. However, the crushing force holding me down began to ease. I risked a glance up at him. His lips were slightly parted, his face a mask of utter shock. I asked him what he wanted, if he could just get it over with. The silence in the room was suffocating. I whispered the question again. He didn't speak. He got off me, walked to the door, and left the room. What was he planning now? Was he getting new instruments of torture? I glanced at the chain on my ankle and decided to stay put. He returned after what felt like an eternity, holding a photograph. His head was down, so I couldn't see his expression. I gripped the bedsheets, my knuckles white. In the next moment, he was at the edge of the bed, kneeling on one knee. He held the photo out for me to see. It was a picture of an 18-year-old Caleb, in a classroom, secretly pressing a kiss to my forehead while I slept. His voice was almost a prayer when he spoke. He told me there was no one else, that it had only ever been me. He said he thought Jessica had sent me this photo too, and that I was trying to run away because I was rejecting him. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. He begged me not to leave. He was luring me into his joy, a dangerous, intoxicating invitation. The predatory vibe was so thick it was palpable. My animal instincts screamed at me, and I tried to inch backward. He surged forward, pressing close until our breaths mingled in the small space between us. I took a shaky breath. I asked him what he would do if I didn't accept. He simply pulled back slightly. I felt a pang of loss. Was he giving up? I frantically looked for him, my eyes wide. I saw his hand, veins bulging, close around my chained ankle. He slowly pushed up the leg of my pants, exposing the pale skin beneath. Then, like a predator, he bared his teeth. A series of wet, sharp sensations followed as he left a trail of marks on my skin. It was a strange mix of pain and itching. I protested. I sat up, leaned forward, and covered his eyes with my hand to stop him. I told him I wouldn't leave, that I liked him so much. This seemed to only excite him more. This time, the marks were not confined to just one place. I was played with until I drifted into a hazy, exhausted sleep. When I woke, the chain was still locked around my ankle. I propped myself up on my sore elbows and kicked Caleb in his solid abdomen. I demanded that he take it off. In response, he rolled over and subjected me to another round of relentless teasing. I yelled, I begged, but my freedom was not granted. With red, swollen lips, I pointed to the bathroom as a last-ditch effort. I told him I needed to use the toilet and asked if he would please unlock me. He just smiled and shook his head. He said no, that I was still thinking of running. I was desperate. I asked him how I was supposed to go to the bathroom. He threw back the covers and stood by the bed. He began to pull a long length of extra chain from a hidden compartment under the bed. I stared, dumbfounded. No wonder I hadn't felt any resistance last night. There was a whole other section hidden away. I gaped at it in disbelief as he scooped me up and carried me into the bathroom. I estimated the chain was long enough for me to move freely throughout the entire master suite. This was some kind of dark romance plot, and my brain had short-circuited. This was not right. It was deeply, fundamentally not right. I didn't understand what had given him the impression that this was an acceptable course of action. Back on the bed, I wrapped my arms around his neck. I told him to be honest with me. The look of pained reluctance on his face confirmed my suspicions. I persisted, nuzzling against him until he finally broke. He confessed that he thought I had liked being around Jessica. The forgotten details, the ones I had pushed to the back of my mind, came rushing forward. Before this life, I had been forced to follow a pre-written script, one that always led me to her. It wasn't until she refused to marry me that I was finally free. But to Caleb, who had been watching from the sidelines, all those actions looked like unrequited pining. I disentangled myself from his arms, walked to the window, and pulled the blackout curtains shut, plunging the room into darkness. I returned to his side and turned off the last lamp. In the pitch black, I showed him the truth. And in the middle of that soul-shaking intimacy, I confessed everything about who I really was. His arms just held me tighter. I lost all sense of day and night. When I woke again, my ankle was free, marked only by a faint red line. Caleb was gone. I followed the scent of food to the living area. He was just setting a tray of breakfast on the table. I went to him without hesitation and wrapped him in a hug. But before I could even take a bite of the delicious-looking food, I received a threatening phone call from my esteemed father. He sneered, asking if I thought I was grown up now. He reminded me that without him, I would be dead in a ditch somewhere. He accused me of being born just to spite him. He then laid out his terms. Either he cut me off completely and let me fend for myself, or I would get the Thorne family to invest $1 billion into his company. He told me to use my skills at pleasing Caleb, to beg him for it in bed if I had to. He ended his tirade with a final, vicious threat. If I didn't comply, he would scatter my mother's ashes to the wind. I should have known. He never called without an ulterior motive. He wanted to use me to bleed the Thornes dry. But he didn't know that I had prepared for this. I had moved my mother's ashes to a secure location long before I made my escape. And his threat of cutting me off financially was meaningless. Just as I was about to tell him off, Caleb snatched the phone from my hand, his voice pure fury. He snarled into the phone that Leo was his partner. He warned my father that if he didn't clean up his language, he wouldn't hesitate to pull the plug on the several projects his company had recently invested in with Sterling Industries. My eyes widened. When had Caleb invested in my father's company? He saw my confusion and mouthed one word to me. Escape. It was to placate my family. I sighed and took the phone back. I told my father to do whatever he wanted with the money. I didn't need it. I informed him that he would never find my mother's ashes, and that I would be paying him back for every penny he ever spent raising me. After that, we would be even. I had no desire to acknowledge a cheating, abusive man as my father. Ignoring his enraged sputtering, I hung up and turned to Caleb. I told him to take the projects back, that the Sterling family didn't deserve a cent. A strange, troubled look crossed Caleb's face. He said that he had already told his parents that those investments were part of my dowry. I suddenly remembered him coming back to the room with a bruised face. I asked him if the reason he was hit wasn't because he helped me escape, but because of the dowry. The question felt strange as I said it. What had really happened? Seeing my utter confusion, Caleb finally explained, though he seemed uncomfortable doing so. He said it wasn't about either of those things. He told me he was disciplined because his parents knew he had finally made his move on me. He explained that my mother had been his mother's best friend. I was the little cabbage they had watched grow up in their own garden, and their pig had just dug it up. Wait, it slowly dawned on me. Caleb really had been deceiving me that day. I lunged at him, hitting him playfully. I called him a shameless liar. But what could I do? I would just have to get used to it. After all, I planned on spending the rest of my life with him.